how if you're influenced by your parents, and then you're influenced by your friends, and then you're influenced by your teachers, if none of them are wealthy,
right,
where is it that you get the knowledge?
Right, that's the whole point of the podcast, right, is to talk to people and kind of get that window into those people with more success, for sure. And I think most folks have limited engagement with those types of people. And if they do have engagement, there's not a lot of advice, or there's not a lot of time provided. So that's the gap that I think we're trying to bridge here.
From Wealth Creators USA, this is From Worry to Wealth, the podcast that shatters the myths and mystique surrounding wealth creation. As students, our schools and universities often neglect the crucial education on the core financial principles. I'm Ben Lyons. I'm a business owner, investor, entrepreneur, and author, and I'm joined by my business partner, Alex Fink. And together, we're here to inspire your journey towards improving your financial self. In a world buzzing with advice on the behaviors and mindset to become wealthy, we'll share proven processes tried and tested by our network of successful collaborators. So get ready to move past worry and move towards wealth and your improved financial self. Hi there, welcome back. I am Ben Lyons, and with me is my co-host of this wonderful podcast, From Worry to Wealth, Mr. Alex Fink, the one and only Alex Fink. Say hi, Alex.
Indeed. Hey, everybody.
Hey, what does everybody think of Alex's hat? I like it. I think it's a great hat. I don't know if he had a bad hair day or what. What is it, Alex? Was it the hair day?
I think I concluded that the less people can see of me physically, the more appealing the podcast will be. So that was my thinking.
Right. And I understand that Mr. Huffman here brought the wide angle lens just for you.
Yes,
today?
to accommodate my sheer mass in the shot, which is nice.
That's right. That's right. All right. And as a comedy skit, we were instructed not to wear black shirts today, and I see you
That's right.
listen to it.
Yeah, because I take direction well.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so today we're going to discuss the wealth creation formula, right, for our viewers.
Absolutely.
Again, this is the From Worry to Wealth podcast, and we're here to talk about the creation of wealth, which is one of the 5 selves. So we're going to discuss a lot of information from the book From Worry to Wealth. I actually brought a copy with me. Here you go. And Alex, this book's meant a lot to me. As you know, I spent years writing it, and you're in the book as a case study.
Indeed.
I was able to...
and that one's not dog-eared. That's a new one. It must be.
This, what?
Ready to hand out. It's not...
That's right. No, this is... In fact, anyone wants this copy, let me know.
Right.
We'll give it to you. I'll sign it. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into the wealth creation formula.
Let's do it.
In the book, we talk about the 5 selves, right? 5 selves. So we have the spiritual self, we have the psychological self, the social self, the physical self, and the financial self. And our podcast is really about the financial self.
Correct.
Right? We can sit here and talk about the physical self, right? We could give spiritual advice.
Yes.
But I think the gyms are really places for people to work.
Probably might be better mentors in those capacities. Yes,
right.
yes.
So we're not going to talk about that.
Correct.
And we're not even going to go into the spiritual self on this podcast. We're going to focus really on the financial self. How about that?
I think that sounds smart.
Okay. So in this podcast, in this wealth creation formula, and we discuss that, we're going to get into a lot of details of what that is. But what I like to do is talk about, in financial terms, who has influenced us. And I know we've talked about how we've been influenced, and I mentioned that we're first influenced by our parents, right?
Correct, yeah.
So and then we're influenced. Who else are we influenced by growing up?
Teachers, clergy, friends. I mean, friends are a huge influence, right? Folks often look to celebrities for enlightenment, right, and influence.
Now, for you growing up, do you remember any wealthy influencers?
Well, we both grew up without a lot of means, I would say. So I do remember. I don't know that I was introduced to a lot of wealthy folks when I was younger. I think I was around some smart people, but I don't know if I could categorize wealthy people and with the thought that this is a wealthy person. So
Yeah, and that's a discussion that we often talk about, is that how, if you're influenced by your parents, and then you're influenced by your friends, and then you're influenced by your teachers, if none of them are wealthy,
Right.
where is it that you get the knowledge?
Right. And that's the whole point of the podcast, right? Is to talk to people and kind of get that window into those people with more success, for sure. And I think most folks have limited engagement with those types of people. And if they do have engagement, there's not a lot of advice, or there's not a lot of time provided. So that's the gap that I think we're trying to bridge here.
Yeah, and I think for those people watching this podcast, our objective is really, when you're old like me, almost 60, it's easy to look back and tell you how I got here. Especially, anybody that has achieved a level of financial success, you're in your you're 10 years.
Yeah, I've got to
younger
change
than
my
me, right?
notes because I had you down as 70, so I'm going to go ahead and dial that back.
That's
a little
right.
bit.
I'm not quite that old.
Right.
I know I look that old,
Right.
but not quite that
Yeah,
old.
I think
but-
I'm in my 40s, my late 40s.
Yeah, good
now.
for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
That is impressive.
Oh,
He looks so much younger than me.
I get
doesn't
older
he?
every single year, so it's not really that impressive, I don't think. Go ahead.
It's hard for someone, let's say in their 20s, to say, how do I get there? How do I look into the future and achieve that financial success, or achieve the best financial self for the future? How do you think most people view the future and being able to see a place of financial abundance? It's probably difficult for most. It was difficult for me. What about for you?
I think for some people, they're very focused on their goals, and so they have this vision of the future, and they strive to achieve that vision. For other people, it's the opposite, right? I've known. So how many employees have we managed over the years? It's tens of thousands, probably, right? So you have some folks that I've met that feel like their life is just inevitable, right? They're just going to get to a certain place, and that's where they're going to go. Maybe their parents told them that they'll never amount to anything. Maybe it was a friend. They're oftentimes people are not so encouraging with folks' ability to build a better life or to build wealth. So you have that facet of folks, right? That you meet. I'm sure you've met some folks like that too, right?
Yeah. So these are the negative people. These are the people.
Yeah, and people, and maybe they're negative inherently because of their environment, or maybe they're just negative because that's their personality. But then you have the opposite of that, which are the people that really do believe in their dreams, and they have a vision board or a storyboard, and they just know they're going to accomplish something. Then you have everybody in the middle. It's kind of where I see it, but that's what I've experienced.
Yeah, so I think what's exciting for me is that I was always very inquisitive of, well, how did that person achieve a level of financial success? And, having now the ability to interview a lot of very successful people, and creating a formula.
Right.
We now give people the ability to learn a formula and apply that formula. Because I don't know about you, but in high school, I didn't go to college, but at home, nobody taught me a formula of how wealth gets created. Where do we go to learn this process of wealth creation?
Right, and that's what's so great about you've distilled down the core tenets of how to build wealth, and it's simple. So as I've endeavored to teach folks about this formula, and I see them exposed to this formula, there's a light bulb, right, that goes on with these folks, and I think it's amazing, because folks will meet a number of different people and they get all this different advice, and some of the advice really just has nothing to do with how to build wealth or create value for yourself. So what I like about the formula is it applies to everybody, right, and it's easy to apply. So I really believe it, and I think it's great.
Yeah, and for those people that are tuning in for the first time, this is not really a behavioral discussion, right? We're not going to sit here and talk about you have to have a positive attitude. All these behavioral ideas are important, and we can get to that some other time. But what we're really attempting to do here is distill a process,
right?
A very specific process. What was the process that Alex Fink executed on? What was the process that people that have achieved a level of wealth executed on? And we broke that down into a formula. So How about we dig into that formula?
That sounds great. Yeah.
All right. So 4 variables. Variable A is investable income, right? And investable income is the ability to outrun our expenses and have a certain amount of money left over after we live and pay our bills and pay all the taxes. Variable B, right? Accumulation of assets. So people that have become wealthy, we've seen that they've been able to achieve that level of wealth by asset accumulation. We can talk about that in a minute. And then variable C and D was the application of leverage and time in the execution of this investable income and the accumulation of assets. So from your perspective, you know, when you think about the ability to create this variable A solution, which is the predictable, scalable, and reliable income, what do you think of when we think about creating the scalability of income? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, my thoughts generally are if you are producing your income based on a quality only that only you possess and only you can perform that task, I think you're pretty limited. But if you can gain a skill that you can use to train others, or we're not talking about leverage too soon here, but
No,
leverage
okay.
that skill to propagate that skill across multiple folks, I think that's where your accumulation of income really comes into play. And you could do that. So if you were an IT resource and you fixed computers, right? And you had to do a manual fix every time and going out there, that's an example of something that's a little bit hard to repeat. But if you built a piece of software, right, that you could then sell 1,000 times, that's more repeatable. Now, if you have that skill where you can fix something and you now train 20, 30 other people, that would be a way to replicate that skill and leverage that skill.
So what you're really saying is that if you have a core competency, let's just say you're a plumber. Let's use a plumber.
Right.
If you develop a core competency as a plumber, how can somebody then scale? We are going to talk about leverage, but how does a plumber, do you think, in terms of solving for variable A, which is the creation of a scalable income, how do you think a plumber could go about scaling his or her income?
Yeah, so I think the easiest and most straightforward path for that would be to hone that skill and get your actual license as a plumber and own a company eventually where you hire individuals underneath you and you can scale that to whatever size you want, right? So I think rather than going out and you're taking every service call, right? You take that knowledge, you get your license if you work for a plumbing company, you develop that company, you build resources, you market, and then you scale that skill. That's what I think.
Yeah, I tell a story about as I was writing this book, there was a nurse who came to me and she was living paycheck to paycheck. And we got to talking about her core competency as a nurse. And we started talking about her developing a nursing staffing agency.
Perfect example.
Yeah. So, you know, she today has, 50 nurses that work for her that she bills out to the hospices, hospitals, nursing homes. And, you know, she's making, I think it's about $5 per hour per nurse.
Right. Yeah.
So
do it 100 times and you can make some pretty decent money. Yeah.
So variable A in the wealth creation formula really starts with solving for scalability. And in the book, we talk about you have to get to at least $20,000 of investable capital. And the reason we picked 20,000 is that you had to have enough of a meaningful number that you can use for variable B, which is investments. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the question is, if you look at every wealthy individual that's self-made, how many of them became multimillionaires, or perhaps even we're going to leave billionaires out of this teaching because I don't think that's what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about taking the everyday person that is going from broke to not broke, or from modestly, on the asset net worth or income scale, and moving that towards wealth. Do you think most people become wealthy because of income, or because of asset acquisition? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think the asset acquisition is the easiest way to do it, and so I think consequently most people that become wealthy do it based on assets for sure.
Okay, so let's then move off of variable A and we'll go right into asset acquisition. What are your thoughts and beliefs around why you believe that it's probably easier and probably more common for people to become wealthy through the asset?
Yeah, so if you can take your investable income and invest it in an asset, the earlier you do that, the better off you're going to be, right? I think you would agree with that, right? So what's nice about it is it doesn't require your time for the most part. Maybe you have a rental property and you get calls on the rental property, but the time allocation is very, very small. So I think for me, you want to invest in appreciable assets. And if you do that, the time that you spend on that asset appreciation is next to nothing. And so you capture all that income without putting in a lot of time. And you could repeat that over and over and over again. As an asset grows, you can leverage that asset to buy another asset. I think that's what's compelling about it from my perspective.
Can you run through maybe for our viewers a list of assets that you think, what are your maybe top 5 assets that you can think of?
Well, there are a number of real estate assets, right? So real estate's an easy one, right? If you can get into an asset relatively well priced, then you can expect some reasonable appreciation. Businesses really of any type would be another asset. And then of course you have investments, right? A lot of different investment strategies, stocks and various other funds that you can leverage. And then of course another asset would be potentially a loan to somebody, right? Where you have
mortgage,
yeah, right,
loan,
where you have
or just a loan, right?
Yep. And let's see, that's 4. You want to help me out with a 5th?
Maybe crypto, maybe.
Maybe crypto.
Yeah.
Maybe crypto. Yeah.
Well, you've got real estate, you've got public securities, right?
Right.
Stocks and bonds.
Businesses.
You've got an independent business or perhaps a franchise.
Right.
Right.
True.
Those are a
Yep.
little bit different. And then mortgages. Certainly,
Insurance product might be one too, because you have certain insurance products that gain value over time. Absolutely.
Yeah. So why do you think if we examined it, let's say the top 10%, so anyone, let's say with a $5 million net worth or more, and we examined, did they become wealthy because of their income, or did they become wealthy because of asset acquisition? What do you think the ratio is, income versus asset acquisition, if you were to guess?
If I were to guess, I would say less than 25% of people on the income side and 75 on the asset side. Do you know the data?
I don't know the data, to be honest. I don't even know that data exists. But
it might not,
my research when I was writing this book and interviewing people, I think that held true. I think it's probably even more skewed to the assets.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. If you think about, I tell this story. If you made $3 million a year in income every year, how long would it take you to be wealthy? Not long.
Right.
Most people don't make $3 million a year. But yet in the wealth creation formula, we're working to solve for that equation.
Right. Even those people that earn the $3 million, they're going to take that $3 million invested in assets, and they're going to continue to do that over time because assets can grow, without the application of time. That when you look at it, the majority of their assets probably came from the asset appreciation. Right.
Yeah. I mean, we hear stories, as you know, all the time of these maybe school teachers that bought stocks in a retirement account, and for 40 straight years they put money away pre-tax.
Right.
And certainly they'll achieve a level of net worth that would consider them maybe top 10% wealthy. That is an example of they didn't get wealthy because of income.
Right.
They got wealthy because they invested in assets.
Right.
So I think I share your view that probably the majority of people got wealthy because of investing in assets. And, one of the reasons we talk about investing in assets so much is that you could buy a property. What's the average down payment on an investment property?
20%.
20%. So you only need 20% of capital to buy an asset that's worth 5 times that.
Right. And you could use other people's money, a loan,
That's right.
to buy an asset, use that asset to pay that money back, and then you didn't really even pay for that asset, right?
Yeah. So I think we're both in the same camp that the acquisition of assets is probably the number one contributor to wealth creation. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about leverage a little bit. and let's talk about it in the sense of how to use leverage in the solving of variable A, which is this creation of a scalable income,
Right.
and also in the acquisition of assets. So for our listeners, how do you think you've used leverage, and how do you think most people should use leverage when we're talking about, let's just stick with the income side.
The income, yeah. Well, you have to leverage a skill, right? Or a product that you.
Okay, so we can leverage a skill, so
Right.
knowledge.
Right.
What else can we leverage?
We can leverage we can leverage our time.
Time.
Right.
Okay.
What else you got?
We can leverage people,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I think if we
It all ties together, right? So you use your skill to
it does
train
all
people.
tie together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the idea of the whole idea of this creation of income has to do with, we need to move away from trading our time for money and find other ways. I say to people, well, how many hours in the day do you have? And you say 24?
Yeah, right.
Well,
right.
what a coincidence.
Yeah.
I have 24. Right. We both have 24 hours in the day. The question is, why do some people make, say, $1 million a day and other people make $100 a day?
Right.
And the answer very well has to do with the fact that if we leverage other people, then we could make more in that hour. So knowledge is probably the number one. And I would say just people.
Yeah, I think you start with knowledge and skill, right?
Yeah.
And then you train other folks on that skill that you've created, something that provides value, and then you leverage those folks to generate more income, for sure.
All right, so let's go maybe to an easier question on how do we use leverage on the accumulation of assets. Well, this is probably a much broader discussion, right?
Right, yeah.
So how do we accumulate assets, and how do we use leverage, and what forms of leverage would we use?
Yeah, so let's just take a basic real estate asset, right? So you can, let's say you buy a $200,000 home, and you made that money over a long period of time, and you use your own cash to pay for the $200,000 home. Now you got one home, right? But if you were to put 20% down on that house, take a $160,000 mortgage, right? You could conceivably have many more homes, and that home can be rented to pay down that mortgage as well as the other homes. And now at the end of the day, you've got, instead of one asset that you have 10 years later, you might have 5 or 10 assets. And so that's the basic concept of
So that's leveraging money, right?
Correct, yeah.
We put down 20%,
Right.
and we use somebody else's money on the other 80%.
Correct.
Now, it is possible we use somebody else's money for the whole thing.
true, even better.
So we can leverage money to accumulate assets.
Right.
Right? How else can we leverage money to buy assets? What are some other examples? Can you think of anything?
So another example that I can think of just out of the gate is if you have any sort of investment, let's say it's a public security, you could take a loan on that public security.
So borrow on margin,
Correct.
right? So
That's right.
we borrow against the stock or the public security
And use that
and
money
use that to buy more
to buy
assets.
more assets. Correct.
That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
All right. I guess in some form, if we're buying stock options, we're somewhat using leverage, right? We're putting down a little bit of money with the right to buy
True.
the
Yep,
asset.
True. Yeah.
All right. Any other uses of leverage with money? For us in the mortgage business, right, or in any type of banking system or insurance system, leverage is used all the time, right?
All the time. Yep. Yeah, it's a core tenet of the industry, for sure.
Yeah, and do you want to cover? Or do you want me to cover kind of how a bank uses leverage?
Yeah, sure. I could cover that. But most banks leverage, what would you say, Ben, is probably 9 to 1.
9 to 1 is the
something
average.
like that.
We looked it up yesterday, actually, at
Right.
lunch.
Yeah, so a bank has to have a certain number of, let's call it reserves, or a certain amount of equity of their own money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they generally use depositors' money for that. I'm sorry, they use shareholders' money for that. Then the depositors' money they use as their money to go out and make more money. Right?
That's right. So they borrow the depositors' money.
Correct. Yeah,
9 times the money that the owners of the bank actually have.
that's exactly right. So if a bank were to put up 10 million, right?
Yeah.
They could use 90 million of deposits,
right?
and have 100 million invested versus 10 million.
That's cool.
And so you could replicate a business model, tenfold using that leverage equation.
Yeah. So if we think about leveraging money, I would say for most people that use leverage to acquire assets, money becomes the number one attribute or driver. And for those of you that are watching this, if you don't understand how leverage works and leveraging money to acquire assets, you really should get the book and continue to watch our podcast and learn how to use somebody else's money really to acquire more assets. So how else do we use leverage in acquiring of assets? So we know we leverage money. How else could we possibly use leverage to accumulate more assets? Any thought come to mind?
Well, you could use assets to acquire other assets too, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let's say you're trying to acquire a business and you want to take a loan to acquire that business. In some cases, you might have to put up an asset to collateralize that loan, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of the inverse, still using money, but
Yeah.
using the asset as leverage in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Yeah, that's right.
You know where that saying came from?
I don't.
Because the rich have assets
Right.
and those assets grow and they can leverage those assets to buy more assets.
Right.
That's why the rich get richer.
Well, there's no question about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Original coined the term here on the podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah.
We're
That's
the
right.
founders
Those
of
are
that.
I'm going to give you that one, Ben.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we talked about leverage, of leveraging money. We've talked about leveraging knowledge. We've talked about leveraging people. We know that we're leveraging people for their knowledge and their time. So speaking of time, let's move into variable D, which is time. And time we break down into the short-term use of time and the long-term use of time. There are attributes that we talk about the long-term use of time, because let's face it, most people cannot become wealthy quickly. The only way you become wealthy quickly is if you inherit it, you win the lottery, or you invent something that's really cool, used by a lot of people right away. Mm-hmm. Let's assume none of us are in that category. Did you invent anything?
I wish I had. Yeah.
Okay. So assuming that you need time, why is time so important? Well, let's break time down into short-term use of time and why time is such a critical component. In my opinion, time is the most important component of the wealth creation formula. And part of the reason, and I'll cover the short-term use of time, and maybe you can cover the long-term use of time, compounding and all the other things. But I teach that broke people spend their time or invest their time very poorly, because broke people don't know how to invest in themselves. So the best investment our viewers can really make is in themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Because once, we've said this in previous podcasts, I say this all the time, but you only have to typically become an expert in something once. I mean, how many times do you have to learn English?
Right, just one time.
One time. How many times do you have to become an expert in a subject?
Right, yeah, just one time.
But you can then leverage that expertise for the rest of your life.
Correct.
And what I find is that if you're broke, or if you're in the broke phase of the wealth creation formula, the most important thing you could do with your time, short-term time, is to learn a skill that allows your value to go up. So instead of watching TV, instead of playing video games, learn something once that can be leveraged forever. So for me, I think time is the most critical component, not because I'm old and I only have a certain amount of time left to live on this planet. Of course, time ticks, what do they say, father time? There's a father time, right?
Father time does, yes.
Not mother time,
No,
it's father time.
It's father time, yes.
Yeah, why is it father time?
We'd have to talk to the actuaries of the insurance business about that. Absolutely.
I mean, I'm closer to death every day now.
That's true.
Yeah,
Each one of us get older every single year.
It's any minute now. I mean,
Yeah,
who
for
knows?
sure. For sure.
So that's why time is so critical. But just in all kidding aside, that we don't value time I think, enough in this society. I think we're willing to waste time, but yet if we make $20 an hour, Alex, and we waste an hour, why don't we just keep taking $20 bills and throw it on the ground?
For sure.
Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah, it is.
So we especially don't value time, I think, for many reasons. But in this discussion of From Worry to Wealth, those of you that are in the broke phase or the early phases of your creation of wealth, you really need to consider how to invest your time to become more valuable. So now let's pivot to long-term use of time.
Well, I want to add one clarification too, because you had mentioned investing in a skill, but then you have to apply that skill, right?
Yeah.
And then you also have to, in terms of short-term time, you can look, and we've had this discussion recently about any of our businesses and how we've functioned over the last several years. You can always look back and apply time to a more valuable place, right? It's those folks that don't ever look at that and don't focus their time on the areas that are most accretive to their lives. That is a challenge, I think, right? So that's I would say that's the second nuance to that time factor.
So you're saying
right?
the application of
what they
learn.
once you have that skill, if let's say you have one business that you can make $10 an hour, another business you can make $50 an hour. Well, clearly, if you apply your time to the more accretive business, you'll have more investable dollars.
So remember that parable we talk about? I guess it's a parable for our viewers. Let's do that. We have a 12-year-old girl riding a bike in a bike race against a professional Olympic cyclist who has to ride a little 3-wheeler tricycle. So for our viewers, if there's a bike race, let's call it a 5-mile bike race, you have a 12-year-old girl on a 10-speed and a professional bicyclist on a tricycle. Who wins the race and why?
The kid, because they've got the better vehicle.
The better vehicle.
Yeah, for sure.
So often what happens with us is that we're pedaling really hard, but because we're on the wrong vehicle, we're not able to get to the finish line quick enough. So is that an example of where if we invested our time to get on a better vehicle?
Yeah, it's good parallel.
If we developed a skill where...
Yeah, if you were going to the store and you had the bike and you had the tricycle and you wanted to spend as little amount of time as possible, you take the bike to the store. Makes perfect sense. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that we talk about being, say, a bricklayer, nothing against bricklayers, or I don't know, let's pick a skill that you could earn 10 times what a bricklayer may make. You're going to spend the hour anyway. So if you can invest your time to develop that higher skill that's within your core competency, that's a great use of short-term time.
Yeah, and an example in a trade would be, because you brought up a construction reference, right? Let's say the drywall, right, in a place. Let's say you have a drywall company. You're great at drywall. Well, there are many, many more people that can hang drywall than can finish drywall. The folks that make the money are the finishers, the one that make it look great. So even if you have that company apply it to that and say, okay, I've got this company, I'm gonna outsource or sub out all the people hanging the drywall, and I'm just going to focus on the finish because that's where I'm going to make all the money. That would be an example of leveraging time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So let's pivot to long-term use of time, because we've talked about wealth being created in 15 to 20 years. Can you think of some applications that we talk about, not only in the book, but you and I talk about all the time, about why long-term use of time is so critical in the creation of wealth with investments and with strategy?
It's just time value of money, right? So the sooner you start investing, the sooner your assets start to accumulate. That accumulation creates more accumulation, and you get to a much better place. I've looked at models that you probably have some data that you've looked at as well, of folks that start investing in their 20s versus their 30s. When those people get to their 60s, the difference between the folks that started investing in their 20s versus 30s is a massive difference.
Yeah, and I think that's through compounding, right?
Right, yeah, for
it's
sure.
It's through the value and benefit of compounding.
Yep.
And I think somebody said compounding was the 8th wonder of the world. I always got that wrong. Was it Albert Einstein? Was it, who said that? I think I quoted Warren Buffett one day, but I think it's actually Albert Einstein who said that that compounding is the eighth wonder of the world.
Yeah.
And it really is.
But Warren Buffett, I mean, it's a core tenet of what he does, right?
Yes.
In terms of compounding interest is his thing.
So what are some of the other attributes when we own real estate? And, I interviewed a guy, I don't want to give you his name. His net worth is about $600 million, and he's in his 90s now, but I interviewed him and I said, hey, what's the one regret you have? And he gave me a very strange answer. He said, I sold assets too early.
Right.
And I said, well,
I think we all have that regret.
Why did you regret that? He said, well, because those assets provided, they kept going up in value.
Talking about appreciation, right? So that's
appreciation is one. So we have appreciation. What are some of the attributes of why time is great with assets? Appreciation's one. Yep. What are some others? Can you think of any others?
Well, compounding interest, depreciation.
Depreciation.
Yep,
right. So you get the tax benefit.
Yep.
Maybe cash flow.
Yep, certainly. Typically, your income on the asset goes up over time as well if you're renting that asset.
That's right. Cash flow or growth of income.
Yeah, for sure.
I think there's one more with real estate that I talk about, which is amortization.
Yep.
And amortization is the tenant or some outside source paying down the debt. Why do you think it takes most people 15 to 20 years to become wealthy? What would your thinking be behind that?
Well, I think you become wealthy much quicker if you have an income strategy that allows you to invest more earlier on. And so logically, right, the younger you are, typically the less you make. So as you get older and older, your income typically goes up. That investable income then goes up, and so you have more capital to deploy or more investment to deploy over time. And that's why I think it takes people some time, because they're not starting out with a ton of assets.
If you look at the statistics to play into what you just said,
right,
people in their 50s and 60s, statistically speaking, are wealthier than people in their 30s and 40s. And that's because of the time element.
Correct.
In the growth of the assets, which is pretty fascinating. So the takeaway is start early, invest early, right?
Save early, start early, keep your spending levels down, right? Because when you're younger, what do you want? You want everything now.
Keep your spending levels down.
Yeah, well, you want everything now,
This
right?
is America, Alex.
Yeah, that's right.
We don't keep our spending levels down.
Yeah.
Right. What are you talking about?
Yeah. But if you could go back and spend a little bit less money and take that money and invest, then the things that you want 10 years later, you can actually have, which is, important.
Yeah, I have another Benism that says people do what's tension relieving instead of goal achieving. So in that spirit, people are willing to spend, on something that feels good first, as opposed to investing first.
For sure. Yeah.
Which we'll get into in some other topics. So the wealth creation formula is really a formula with the application of these four variables. And, the way I like to talk about it is that these four variables are like recipes, a recipe baking a cake. Not everybody will use these variables the same way. Not everybody bakes the cake exactly the same way, but yet the ingredients for most cakes are the same.
Exactly the same. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So anything else that comes to your mind on the wealth creation formula that you think our viewers would benefit from? I know you've applied this formula. I'm sure other people. Why do you think this formula is so profound?
I think for me, I had to figure this out on my own, right, and make a tremendous number of mistakes. But the formula, I think that probably the best advice I could give is to use it, right? And really understand it. It's a very, very simple formula. And if you apply it, it works. And I don't know what else you could ask for, right? So I think people wait. There's folks that may say, I'll get there. I want to do these things first. Or again, that goes to time. You're losing a ton of time by not applying this information. And so we've been able to distill down a formula that is real and works and we've used, but we never had that opportunity to learn that formula when we were younger, right? So hopefully for the folks listening and for the folks that are genuinely interested in bettering themselves and in creating wealth, this formula is the core of what you're going to follow. And I think the sooner you apply the principles, the better off you're going to be. And don't get discouraged. Don't let folks try to get you off track. Use it. Use the knowledge, right? You can watch 100 people make 100, 200 mistakes. If you don't learn from those mistakes, what has that taught you? And I think that's probably the
Yeah, great message. And Alex, before we wrap up this podcast, I just want to go back through and kind of just a little bit slower, maybe just organize this wealth creation formula and the application of it. If we're teaching somebody how to bake a cake, and we went to like the best cake baker out there, one of the first things they would do is they would give us a recipe. And that in and of itself wouldn't work. It would just be a list of ingredients.
right.
We wouldn't necessarily know exactly how to do that, how to apply these ingredients.
Right.
So it's not enough just to hear this formula. It's really, you got to understand the concept. You have to, as you said, go out and apply it. But it's variable A, which is investable income, the creation of investable income. Many people, I think it's 50% of this country, live paycheck to paycheck, meaning they don't have money left over if they have an interruption in their income to sustain their lifestyle,
Right.
which is pretty fascinating.
Yep.
So one of the first things that people need to solve is variable A, which is the creation of a scalable income to outrun their expenses and have capital to invest. And in this formula, we have to focus on these different ways. And in future podcasts, we're going to discuss those ways
Right.
that you've deployed, that I've deployed, ways to create scalable income. So that's variable A, right?
Yep. And folks should learn from us, right? We've tried a number of different businesses. If you're in a situation, as Ben mentioned, where you don't have disposable income, we have some suggestions for you. And this process and this formula, when applied, works. And to the extent that you don't have the opportunity to do it on your own, we're happy to help you with that.
Yeah, excellent. Great point. So moving into variable B. Variable B is the accumulation of
Assets.
assets.
Yes.
And we believe that assets are the largest contributor of somebody's net worth.
Correct. Yeah.
And we'll, in future podcasts, go through in great detail different types of assets that people can acquire, right?
Right.
I think
Correct.
You and I love real estate, right?
We do.
We
Yep.
love real estate, but we love other assets. We like all kinds of assets,
We do.
don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. And
Anything that appreciates, we like. Yeah.
That's right. Variables C and D, leverage.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about leveraging different things, right? Leveraging people
Right.
for their
Exactly.
time and their knowledge.
Right.
We talked about leveraging money. We love leveraging money.
We do. Yes.
And then variable D is time.
Time. Yep.
And time we broke down into short-term and long-term use of time. So that effectively is this formula that Wealth Creators from Worry to Wealth is all about. And our podcast is really about unraveling how our guests, because we'll be bringing on a lot of guests that are self-made, and how those individuals have applied this formula. And really over and over and over again, you're going to hear that every single wealthy person that I've ever met or interviewed, if you look at this formula, they've used this formula.
Oh, exactly. Right. And that's why I mentioned, I don't know of another system that's broken down the success of so many people in so many different industries into a repeatable formula that's easy to understand, that's simple enough to apply, right?
Yeah.